We're going to have a panel discussion. I'm not going to lead it, you're going to lead it. So we need you to put your thinking caps on now and aim some really good questions at the three gentlemen, which we'll bring up on the stage now, if we may.
I guess one thing I've struggled with, and I'm fully buzzword compliant, but the one thing I always trip over is, how do I know that my data's not crap? I mean, if you could speak in broad terms, because I've looked at web server logs, I've looked at error logs, I've looked at all this stuff, and maybe I just don't have the credentials or the education to get there. But if you could just speak broadly about that.
I think the answer is your data is probably as crap. But that's okay. Most people's data is crap. Yeah, exactly. It's all crap. No, there's it's a little bit. It reminds me a little bit of what you were talking about how you get into the security domain. There's a variety of different mechanisms to actually look and evaluate the quality of your data. Some of it's statistical in nature. Some of it can be rules driven by data value. And some of it can be getting into more like artificial intelligence domain, doing things like natural language processing on data to actually evaluate the quality of the information. So there's actually, there's no one single approach to sort of evaluate quality of data. And the better tools that are out there tend to sort of divide and conquer. And so you can run it through what we call sort of like pipeline processing chains, where you're actually hitting different types of pattern analysis, different types of processing to really target the problem that you're trying to solve for. And you actually mentioned this in your speech as well. One of the things we really recommend is you don't try to, the phrase is boil the ocean. You don't try to do everything at once. You try to start with sort of a specific business question. So a real common one that we see quite a bit, I would say it's one of the larger sub-segments of the data cleansing marketplace, if you will, is actually just doing simple things like address validation and address verification. Answering the question, if you're in commerce or if you have anything to do with shipping things to your customers, is the address that just got keyed into my application a real address? Is it an address that somebody could ship something to? And there's software out there that'll do that. So, I think the short answer is there's no one single silver bullet. The better tool providers out there will often give you a selection of tools that can be really focused on whatever business problem you're trying to solve. And for the business problem, I think the answer is usually, start small and start focused.
Basically, your data is crap. I came from criminal justice, and the first thing that the police will do is steal your rubbish. They find out more about you from your rubbish than they'll ever find out about any other way. And in data, I think we found the same thing in many cases. We've got another question.
But I got one now. So how much of this data going forward do you think are coming from mobile devices and actually from mobile apps? And follow up on that is, what business areas do you see are the ones that are actually pulling that data and creating something out of it?
Yeah, we can pass it around. I don't want to. The statistics that I've seen are that anywhere from 70 to 85% of the new data being created nowadays is unstructured in content, and that includes, those stats include things like what I would personally call, some people call it semi-structured. I like the word polystructured is sometimes how you see that described as well. I like that. What you get is sort of non-repeating metadata lines in things like weblogs. So the other gentleman mentioned looking at the quality of weblogs. So that type of web traffic or social traffic, that's typically what you'd see from a mobile device. So what's happening on the back end often is you're getting actions that are recorded through some type of web server, some type of mobile web server. And that's going to be organized in sort of these polystructured formats. And that content is, again, I think probably around what I've seen is 20 to 30% of the 85. So, I mean, it's a huge part of the growth that we're seeing, especially with the dominance of smartphones. Now, again, my theme of 5 years ago versus 5 years from now. 5 years ago, smartphones were still very niche-oriented, but now, you know, I was just in China 2 weeks ago, and you know, it's amazing, the iPhone knockoffs. Everybody has an iPhone knockoff in China, and so it's, you know, you look around, and you know, everybody's got a smartphone, and it's really amazing. So I think all of that data that's being generated on the back end of those systems, you know, what's there, I'm probably got my math wrong. 2 billion people in China, more. 1.2. So, you know, that's a lot of data that they're generating on their knockoff iPhones, you know, in China Mobile, and so, and that data needs to be cleansed, and you know, you know, that's the type of volume that I'm hearing. I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah, and there was the follow-up. So what companies are actually the ones dominating the pulling of that data and actually making something out of it? So how do you reach it? How do you take it from the devices?
I see. Yeah, so I'm not very familiar with the European market, so I don't know which clients are going to be dominating here. But what I've seen, and you can maybe jump in on the second part of this, what I've seen is people standing up very large Hadoop clusters to basically store those hundreds of petabytes of content, and then, you know, what's happening is I've seen it both in a cloud-based. I see often managed clouds are kind of a lot of what I'm seeing some bigger clients do, or people that are standing up their own environments. I see a lot of activity around open source. So you talk about, you know, which vendors are doing the work. I mean, obviously, IBM and HP, and I think, you know, all the usual suspects are there. I mean, I was at Oracle 6 years before coming to IBM. All of those vendors want a piece of that. In the US, another vendor that is surprising a lot of people being in that space is actually Amazon. Amazon has a huge cloud infrastructure, and they're doing a lot of managed server deployments for these mobile device processing problems. And then, you know, but when you get down into what a lot of the work that's happening at the software level, a lot of it's open source. And so I think HP's involved here. IBM, we're involved in these Hadoop programs. We have our distributions that are doing a lot of the open source work. And at the end of the day, the data scientists are the ones that are still writing these massively parallel processing programs that are extracting insights out of all that mobile web traffic. And so I see, you know, a lot of these managed cloud infrastructures going up. I don't know if,
I totally agree, but I think the social media, if that's a Skype or Facebook or a Google or whatever, is getting all the data from us. Even if it's just a device-to-device type of traffic, it also creates data. You know, you have your toaster to the internet soon, and or your lighting, or your, you know, curtains, and you know, okay, they're not home. Let's break in. So I think we have to be a bit careful about all the devices that are also creating data.
My toilet connects to the internet too, but it never updates its status. It's a true story. There's an element from a security side. There's a category called mobile device management. And what's happening is most every company has started this kind of dealing with the reality of the fact that they're bringing mobile devices onto the network. And as a function of bringing the devices onto the network, you now have huge amounts of unstructured and also unreliable devices that are now inside your corporate network. And there's this really odd set of companies out there called MDM, Mobile Device Management. And the bizarre part, if you look at the products, is they're effectively focused on locking and wiping the device if the employee leaves, the device is lost or stolen. Now, there are two problems with that from a consumer perspective. One is when you wipe the device, it's not selective, it wipes your entire device. So you can lose all your personal information because you were checking your email once in a while off the company network. For me personally, that's kind of a problem. The second issue is actually the business side.
That's why you use the Dropbox service out of the corporate network.
So that's actually that's the second problem, right? Is that pretty much every employee uses Dropbox or Box.net or iCloud. So the problem is by the time you actually wipe the device, all of your company data has been pushed up to the cloud every single day. So you're actually not actually solving the problem. The data's long gone, but it feels good, but it doesn't do anything. So there's two aspects to it.
I mean, if you follow up right now, MDM is not the future when it comes to security. Are containers the next big thing? Containers that bring your own device, but you have a container to protect your data. There's a big market around containers where you have two sets of desktop on your phone, one a company desktop, one your private desktop. Are containers the future? Are they the new MDM? Or going to replace MDMs right now?
So, well, the ironically named good is probably the best example, which is if you build a terrible user experience, your users will just work around it. Right? And so the problem with containerization, where what he's asking is this concept where you say, I'm going to have two calendars and two email boxes and two sets of applications. It's kind of like the Noah's Ark of business applications. You've got 2 by 2 by 2, and one for personal, one for business. That's not really how people work and how people live. So I've never heard anyone say, I'd love to have a calendar where only half of my information lives. Right? I don't know how you kind of live in that world. So I think the problem with containerization is when you're talking about total containerization is that it just creates a terrible user experience, and then inevitably users just kind of work around it. There's some interesting technology going on around micro-containerization, where you're containering on the app level as opposed to the overall device level. That's more interesting, but I think until they solve the user experience problem, I don't think it works.
So currently there's no bulletproof solution for this problem. If MDM is not there, it's not the solution, and containers are not yet the solution. So there's still an opportunity up there, or this problem has not been solved yet.
So we've been looking at this problem a lot. I think I'll give you my personal view, which is I think that fundamentally the real thing that you care about as a company is not the device, you care about the data. And so the really interesting question is, how do I control the flow of data as it goes from the corporation down to the device? And then more importantly, how do I make sure that I control the flow of the data off the device? That's the really interesting question. That's a data security question. That's less a device question. So I actually think the future is in mobile data security, not in mobile device management. And there are some really cool startups like Blue Box and Mobile Spaces and others that are kind of looking at that area.
Can I get on that? So I think here is the perfect example of a hybrid cloud delivery. It's speed of what experience you can give to the users. So if your corporation need a Dropbox-like solution, in order to maintain the experience that we expect, but in a secure way, can we wait for that service in 6 months? Probably not. Can you find it out there in a day? Good. Or can you create it in a day in your data center? So I think it's important to understand that the speed of delivering new services is critical to an IT CIO, for example. So.
Right. The problem that you mentioned on like having two sets of logins or two sets of accounts, basically, as a problem on the bring your own device stuff, right? That you have two different interfaces there to, one private and one business. I mean, the cloud services are basically aren't they the bridge to gap that problem, right? Basically.
They are, right, but not from the company's perspective. So if I've got Dropbox personally installed, which I do, I think in violation of company policy, but as I said, I'm not a good employee. You've got, I'm using Dropbox because it's easier and it's convenient. I'm not using it with any malintent or desire to kind of share information. I'm using it because it helps me work more productively. I think so long as people can work more productively around the company than with the company, they'll continue to do that. So I think the onus is on the company to get security right and get application connectivity right and do it in a way that helps their employees, not hurts them.
I have a question to you, David. First of all, thank you for a really nice presentation and really nice story. And actually, that presentation leaves a feeling of such World War II amplifier that you are trying to fool us a bit, showing that picture that you can track every hacker in the world and so on. But still, some time ago, people start to build a botnet just to hide their IP addresses and actually generate a lot to do a botnet attacks. Obviously, next step is to generate a data to fool your system, to hide the identity. by just generating 200 of me with different parameters and attacking and just picking up some parameters from every attack, but not showing myself. What is the next step for you? Because that game is like a chess. You're doing one turn and your opponent do another turn.
Yeah, that's why I like this business. Turns out we're pretty good at chess. But so the question you're asking is a fair one, which is, let me just more broaden it, because it's not just as specific as that. It's a much broader problem, which is, aren't hackers going to get smarter too? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we kind of built our business on the thesis that not the kind of traditional security, the idea that you just build a perfect wall and close your eyes, but rather you kind of assume that hackers are smart and are going to break in given enough kind of time, money, expertise. So I don't believe in perfect security. I spent most of my life buying shitty security products from a variety of vendors. Now I find myself on the vendor side having to make similar claims. And so I think the right answer is, and I talked about this when I was talking to a few of you afterwards, is it's about how do I make it 100x more expensive? It's about changing the economics of it. Because hacking is not a fight that you ever win, in my opinion, but it's a fight that you can actually flip the economics on. And there's an example from the world of anti-spam that I think is highly relevant, which is it's probably been 4 or 5 years since anyone in this room really cared about the spam problem. And before that, there was a problem where, if you remember, spam was 90%, then 95, 96, 97% of all the email, and every spam solution out there sucked. And so people are starting to say, is this the end of email? Because spam was taking over. And finally, companies figured out that if you could combine message level specificity, if you could combine the ability to have a cloud infrastructure, if you could do it at scale with statistical significance, you could fix the problem. Right? It turns out they were right. That's why no one in this room really cares about spam anymore. Not like you used to. I think the same thing is going to be true in hacking, but the difference is people are going to get smarter, and so they'll find the next thing. And I think the onus is on security companies to figure out how to get smarter too. I don't think we win that fight, but I do think we can help our customers change the economics. So that's our focus.
We've heard about 3 very interesting technologies today: the fingerprinting, the big data, and everything that is happening in the cloud. The fingerprinting is very interesting when it's being used for security reasons and stop the hacker community for fiddling with the websites. Unfortunately, when fingerprinting is being used, well, I can see that fingerprinting could be used to track me as a customer or a possible customer, and companies also use big data to collect information about me and using it more or less against me. I see there is a big privacy issue if these good technologies are used in a bad way.
Yep. It's the history of weaponization, right? You can, whether you're talking about muskets or rifles or assault weapons, every technology has good and bad sides to it. To me, I always kind of think of the Einstein quote, which is, he once said, and I think it's going to be true, I don't know what weapons they used in the last World War, but the next one will be fought with sticks and stones. I think that's probably going to turn out to be true, right? I think technology is unfortunately a kind of very dangerous one-way path. You know, I think the job is to figure out the balance and to legislate that balance, but you're absolutely right. Now, it turns out we're not really interested in tracking you, but maybe somebody is. I'm not sure why. I'd like to hear about that after. Maybe one-on-one if you want to admit anything. But no, I don't think it's a solvable problem.
For 2 years, I was Chief Technology Officer for criminal justice in Great Britain, which includes security services and everything like that. And I actually do have a lot of qualms about what we could do. One of the problems with government and with security people is they look through the world down the wrong end of a telescope. And it's one of the only questions they can't answer is why. So I say, I want to know this, and you ask why, and they say, yeah, because I want to know this. We need to know this. And therefore, they will use any tool. And I think it's the duty of civil society to hold ourselves back from that. I mean, you know, supposedly government works for the people. I've got a very good, I think, during a recent interview, the head of the People's Republic of China, the new boss, was asked why democracy wasn't spreading, and he says, we have Weibo instead of democracy. We know within seconds what China thinks. And they're actually using social media as a platform to understand both individual and groups and everything, how their thoughts are moving, which way the government should bend in front of it. So knowing about you is something, yes, governments, all organizations are always going to do. I mean, if I'm trying to sell you widgets, I want to know what flavor, size, color of widget you want. And the marketing man will keep on digging until somebody says stop. So I actually think companies have to have a form of ethics, which I was pointing one of the most ethical companies. I shan't speak about IBM or HP or Klarna, but you know, we have to have a set of ethics that we have to apply.
To David again. You talked about some sort of smart detection of hackers and the types of attacks, and you have a network that you can go out to the cloud and you can basically post this around the world about this person as a suspected hacker. Is there a way, as if I was an individual, do I even know, say I'm not a hacker and somehow I get on this suspected hackers list? What's the degree?
This sounds like an extension of his problems.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
You just don't know.
I mean, what's the degree of false positives here, and what is the impact of me as a? Do I even know that this happens? And if it does happen, what are the ramifications for me as an individual?
All right. Let me give you the short answer and the long one. Let me just give you the short one. You have that problem today with IP addresses. So already you have what's called IP reputation databases. Nearly every security vendor has them. And those vendors track with a very kind of blunt instrument of IP address, where you and 500 people like you might be deemed a bad person because one guy behind that IP address did actually do something bad, or maybe the system just wasn't very good. The benefit of going from IP address to device is that you lose that problem of coarse grain and you get specificity. It's not a perfect solution. You can still get mistakenly tracked. Probably the best example that I can think of is in online banking, there's a very, very big problem right now called man in the browser, boy in the browser. And these guys are stealing several $1 billion a year. It's mostly Eastern European, stealing from Western and European banks. And I guess the way I think about it is this, which is if I accidentally get a botnet on my machine, I don't know it's there, I'm not intentionally doing anything bad, and I try to log into my bank, and someone's about to use that login to steal my money, I'd prefer it doesn't happen. I'd prefer the bank block the transaction. So I think there's an opportunity to actually use that for a huge benefit, where the user may not be aware they've got a problem, but they have one anyway. There's certainly the opposite side of that problem, which is you incorrectly get flagged, and how do you get off? It's really simple. We kind of provide a key, you call, you put in your key, you're off.
And how are you aware that it's happened?
How am I aware, or how are you aware? The bank will pull up something that says, look, we detect malicious activity. We're not going to let you complete this transaction. Call this number if you want to complete it by phone, or put in this key, and you can actually turn yourself off the list. Now, if you do something wrong again, we add you again.
So there's like an alert into a specific vendor or a customer of yours, for example, saying, by the way, we think this person is a suspicious one.
Yeah, and remember that not every company looks at enforcement the same way. So banks might decide to actively block you. Others will just silently monitor, really looking for advanced attackers. So it just depends. I think there's one over there, one down here.
My question was here. My question was, you have chosen the security like a fingerprint for security. So there are other type of securities like for eye scanner or head, scanning the face like that. So what's the specific reason for choosing the fingerprint?
Well, so when I say fingerprint, I'm talking about a digital fingerprint of your PC. If I could retinal scan your eye, and I probably could with some slightly more invasive technology, that would be interesting. We actually were playing around with this idea of capturing your webcam and taking a picture of you and printing it out on your PC with a wanted poster, but our attorneys had all sorts of good reasons why that was not a good idea. We're talking about digital fingerprinting of your device. It has nothing to do with you as a person.
I actually can give you one that you'd like, because you want to get a real one. Somebody stole my Lumia phone a few weeks ago on the London Eye. And the fool was actually looking at it when I used the app that checks where it is. So I took his photograph. I mean, he saw it go. I'm sure he saw it being taken, but there's not much. So he still had the dim expression on his face when the policeman came to his door about 20 minutes later. And he said, no, it's nothing to do with me. And the policeman held up the photocopier or the fax that I'd sent to the police station. So we can do it. We'll start on that. But I don't think that sort of thing is something we're going to be doing very often.
Yeah, I have a question. You were talking about the rate at which data is increasing. But at the same way, all the storage and processing systems are also increasing every day. But if we see from starting from 80s, relational databases were dominating the whole world. But for last 5 years, there are so many storage system and processing systems has been produced to handle the data, but still they are not sufficient. So if you see that in the next 5 years, the data will be generated a lot, how you see that these processing system, will it get mature, or companies will keep on producing the new processing frameworks or the storage system?
So I think I understood that question. So let me, before I answer directly, though, I wanted to build off of what you said to actually tie back to the privacy discussion that we've been having, which is to note that because of all these sort of low-cost, newer data storage solutions that have been coming out in the last 5 years, one of the things that's fundamentally changing around data privacy these days is that you don't ever have to throw data away. And so this notion that you may be able to do things like violate people's privacy, but in the future using techniques that you don't know about at the moment is something that's really different. It really used to be, years ago, it was under the purview of enormous organizations, governmental-sized organizations, that even had the resources to store information at that scale. And now anybody with a credit card can basically get hundreds of petabytes of storage from some cloud provider. And so you never have to throw data away, and you can be thinking of creative ways to exploit people for many years to come on data that they've actually produced years ago. And so I think that's one of the things that is fundamentally different today than in the past. The question about the storage techniques, though, what we see happening is that first of all, the death of any particular piece of enterprise software is always overrated. And so in the case of relational databases, it's still approximately a $40 billion a year market. It's still growing at double-digit rates. Large structured data warehouses like Teradata, from IBM, Netezza, from Oracle, et cetera, continue to dominate what we would call sort of high-value trusted analytics in organizations, where we see this rise of the newer content types around NoSQL data for semi-structured content, or Hadoop as a data processing platform that can leverage parallel compute platforms. It's really changing the economics of the data that's actually stored on it. So you can actually now choose to save your petabytes of information, your weblog data, in perpetuity for very low cost per megabyte. And that's one of the things that's fundamentally different. But what you won't see happen is you won't see the type of business intelligence or predictive analytics that's done on highly structured data entirely shift over to these new data platforms overnight. It's just not going to happen. What we see happening, really, couple patterns, two patterns in big data that are dominating right now. One is what we call data warehouse landing zone architecture, and the other is what we call customer 360. So with data warehouse landing zone, what we see people building is a pipeline of content that starts very broad, hundreds, perhaps petabytes or hundreds of petabytes, and it's a funnel that gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you're doing some very precise analytics in the warehouse. And you're basically augmenting or refining the data as it goes through that pipeline to the point where you're getting to some very high value analytics in a predictive platform or in a reporting platform. And there's value at every step along the pipeline, but as you're doing the refinement, think of the data as the new oil metaphor. As you're refining the data in the same way that you refine crude oil, there's value at every step. But in the end, when you get to sort of that very distilled content, that's what's driving a lot of high-end business decision-making in global 2000 companies. The other use case I mentioned is Customer 360. For 10, 15 years, we've had customer analytics. It's just what we were looking at. So we were looking at their transactional behavior on our commerce platform. So we were looking at their structured data and how they purchased from us as businesses. Now what we see clients doing with this Customer 360 is they're merging it with their Twitter streams, with their Facebook, with their mobile purchasing patterns, with their browsing behaviors from marketing websites. And so you're combining all of that semi-structured and unstructured content to now get this profile of a customer so that you can do things like in real time make recommendations or show them a different set of products on a web page as you browse it. And so that is all happening in real time on big data platforms using technologies like streaming data or Hadoop. And so these are the types of things we see with these newer data platforms. And it's really, we see augmenting the way that businesses have been operating. It's not causing a disruption that businesses are throwing out their old tools. It's really just adding more capabilities to the tools they had.
So mentioning about big data and privacy concern, especially about government ethics, this reminds me of the recent controversial news about Project Prisms, reviewed by Edward Snowden, as many of you already know. What are your views on this? I mean, do you think it's true? If yes, do you agree with it, or what do you think we should do about it?
Part's true, that Edward Snowden walked out with data? Yeah, that's true. Which part?
That they actually monitor what we are doing, and especially if you are not U.S. citizens, you are messing with all your mess with all your data.
UK government again. No, I mean yes, it's absolutely true. There are two realities that people should understand. One, the U.S. government is far from the only government that tracks its citizens. It's a fairly widely held practice, despite the fact that people don't like it. I actually think it opened the door to good conversation about what should be tracked and what shouldn't be. I would probably, as a citizen, I'd probably draw the lines personally. I think people confuse the NSA with America's view as opposed to the NSA's view. I think, even if you look inside of our Congress or even if you look at the average citizen, I think they were wildly opposed to it, right? So it represents a view, but a niche view. So I think that stuff has to get worked out. I don't know if there's any better answer than that.
I did that real quick. I think the thing that surprised me the most when that story broke was how many people were surprised. I mean, there literally the month before the story broke, there was a cover story on Wired about the data center being built in Utah that was specifically designed to hold, thousands of petabytes of people's web traffic. And so the Prism charts were actually on the web, hosted on Carnegie Mellon from a talk that was given the year before, the Prism stuff. So, I mean, that kind of stuff has been going on for a long time. I think what was surprising to me was how many people were actually surprised that this was news.
Actually, I think a very interesting one is 2 years ago, the European government, or the European Union, issued a report which actually names all these different things. And it also put into lists, it actually named the countries within the European Union and how much information they track about individuals. And Sweden won the prize. That's a point you should understand. Sweden won the prize. The United Kingdom, which is about on the same level as the United States, we were way down there. So, interesting.
When basically you got a false result of the fingerprint technology, that you could display like a message or something, or a bank could display a message. But what about if it is a targeted false result? Someone is making your computer display a targeted false results, and then using HTTP hijacking also show you a false page with contact information.
That is a very geeky and awesome question indeed. I mean, it's probably the only two people in the room that are interested, but I will answer it because I love the question. So the short answer is that the way to think about it is this: there are multiple ways that a bank can authenticate. When you get into the world of man in the browser, boy in the browser, which is probably the biggest risk, the bank really can't do anything because by definition it's an inline proxy. They don't need our device fingerprinting to actually have someone pick up the phone. If you're a man in the browser, boy in the browser attack, because you're an inline proxy, I can literally push anything I want. If you've never seen those attacks, the really interesting way they work, and I've actually watched the hack-in process, is you go out to your bank, you log in. You've got two-factor authentication now, so you feel really safe. You go out, and I wire $1,000 to her, and in my screen, it shows me the $1,000. Behind the scenes, the person sitting in the middle wires $100,000 to themselves. But that doesn't show up because they're controlling what's being pushed to my browser. If I log out and 5 days later log back in, it'll continue to show that $1,000. It's only when my physical bank statement arrives in the mail do I realize what had actually happened. That problem already exists, but it's way worse than me pushing a fake phone number for you to call. I right now can use that to steal money. So the problem already exists on a massive scale.
Thanks very much. Thanks for some great questions. Can I have a big round of applause for three great speakers?